Hey everyone, today we're going to look at how to print projects full scale from your Vectric software. So for this lesson, I'm going to use my logo as an example. So after you have your design all figured out and you create a toolpath for your design, some situations you may want to print your project out in full scale before you cut it. And that could be for either getting an idea of what the overall size will be, or you can even use it for layout purposes if you were to glue these pieces on separately and you wanted a full scale drawing to be able to line those pieces up perfectly. So you can see this project here is about 10 3/4 tall and about 26 5/8 in width. So you can tell this is much larger than a sheet of paper would be to print on your printer. So you would not be able to print this out in full scale on a single sheet. And you can see if we went to File and go to Print Preview, you can see this is a single sheet of letter paper, and you can see how small our design is on that sheet there. And the way Vectric works is however close zoomed in you are to your design, and if you go back to Print Preview, you can see it's going to zoom in on your preview. So there's no actual way to get a scale of your design when you try to use that print feature. So I put a lot of thought into how to do this in Vectric software, and today I'm going to show you the system I came up with to be able to print large designs full scale onto regular letter paper. And I created a template that will work in Cut2d, Vcarve, and Aspire, and I will put that template in the description of the video if you would like to download it. So the first thing we want to do in our project file here is we want to select the items that we want to print, and we're going to copy these and then paste them into our template. So we're going to select our sign here. We don't need the measurements, so we're not going to select those. But you can see we have these items grouped together. So first thing we want to do is ungroup everything. So with all the objects selected, a quick way to ungroup is type the letter U on your keyboard. And if you have multiple groups, you may have to press that a couple times. In this case, I just had to press it one time there. So right now I have everything ungrouped. The next thing I want to do is put this all on one layer. So you may already have it all on one layer, but just in case, you want to right click, go to Move to Layer, and I want to put this all on layer 1. You can have these on separate layers, but I'll show you when we get into our template. It's a little bit easier if you just have it on one layer. So now that we have everything ungrouped and everything onto layer 1, we're going to right click on our design and click Copy. So now we're done here in our project file. Let's open up our template. So I'm going to go to my file menu here. This is the template I will have available for download, so you can find that in the description of this video. We're going to double click on this template. I'm going to open that up. And this template was made in version 10.5. So if you're using a version below 10.5, this template will probably not work. So just keep that in mind. But when you open the template, it's going to take you to your job setup. And you can see the job setup is set to 8.5 by 11. That's a standard letter size piece of paper. And we're going to keep it that size. We don't need to adjust anything here. So we're just going to click OK. Now you can see down here is our job size, and this is the size of a single sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11 inches. But you can see we have multiple sheets up here, and I have 100 sheets in here, so you have a very large job size that you can create in here. And if we select all these are the 100 sheets that represent these templates over here. And if you look down here at the bottom, the width and the height is 75 inches wide by 100 inches tall. So that will allow you to print full scale at least that size. If you need it larger, you can adjust these sheets around to accommodate whatever you're trying to print. But just for this template, I made it 10 by 10 pages. So that gives you 100 sheets total, equaling 75 inches wide and 100 inches tall. And these sheets over here are slightly smaller than an actual full sheet of letter paper. And that was just to give you some print margin around the sheet there, because most printers can't print all the way to the edge of the paper. So that's why these are slightly smaller. You have a 1/2 inch margin around the paper. So now that we see what we're working with, I'll show you how to use this. So the first thing you want to do is right click and you want to paste your design in. And you see that came in down here because it goes in the same exact location that it was copied from. And so now we want to move this into these sheets over here. And we're going to place this right about there. Let's zoom in, see where we're at. And you see where all these sheets lie. You want to position your project in a nice spot where it's easy to join these together between the sheets. So wherever you see one of these gray lines is where it's going to cut your design on a separate piece of paper. So you can see if you were to move this right about there, you may not want that part of the O, just that little sliver there. So you can see we have a lot of room over here. So you can adjust your design and move it between 2 letters there. That way you're not cutting that little sliver there. But you can see it's going to cut the A in half right here, but that's okay. But you just want to move it around to what makes sense the most to you, where it's going to cut the design. And you can see right here, it's going to cut that little sliver there. So I try to make it the best possible location for having nice cuts. So you may want to just play around with this. So I'm going to move it. We'll try right about there maybe. Actually, I'll move this up a little bit and to the right a little bit. We'll do right about there. Looks okay. Okay, so once you have your design positioned where you want it, all these extra sheets up here, we do not need. This is just in case you have a larger design. We only need these sheets right here. So we have this position where we want it. We're going to deselect everything. And now we're going to select the design and all those sheets that are touching the design. And we're going to make a copy of this. So we're going to double click on this to be able to move it. And to make a copy, you can hold your control key and drag this down and release your mouse and then release the control key. And now you have a copy of the original shape there. And now before you go much further, you can zoom in on this design and you can see it shows the page number of each one of these pages. And that's going to make it easier for you to figure out which one goes where. So if you zoom in on this, you can go to File and we can go to Print Preview. And you can see it's showing us both of these designs. We only want this one really. And we're also in portrait mode. So this design will print better in landscape because it's a little bit longer than it is tall. So let's close this. We'll go to File. We'll go to Print Setup. And let's switch this to Landscape and click OK. And this is a little bit close to this design up here. So I'm going to move this down just a little bit further down and then zoom in on this. And actually with your design selected here, you can click this button up here, Zoom Active View to Selected Objects. And if you click that, that'll automatically zoom into that window there and fill our window here with this design. So now let's deselect everything. We'll go to File, Print Preview, and you can see this time it's only this design. And now we're in our landscape mode and you can see everything nice and clear. So I'm gonna go to Print and I'm gonna print this out on my printer. Now that's not in full scale, that's just kind of like a map to let us know where each of our design goes. So I'm going to print that out first. And now we're ready to create our design into full scale to be able to print. So to do that, we have to cut all of our vectors at all of these intersections. And there's a few ways to do this. The easiest way I found is if you select your entire design, double click on it to go into the transform mode, hold your control key again and drag it to the side, and then release your mouse. And now we have another copy. And right now we don't need the page numbers, so I'm gonna go to the layers up here, and I'm gonna hide the visibility of page numbers to get those out of our way. And then let's go out of our layers. Now for these pages here, I want to do every other sheet on both of these. So for instance, on the left side here, I'm going to delete this one down here and then skip this one. I want to keep this one and then delete the next one. And then the next row up, I want to stagger that. So I'm going to keep the first one, delete the second one, keep the third, delete the fourth. Now for this side, I'm going to keep this page, this page, this page, and this page. And then those other ones, I'm going to get rid of those vectors. So on this side, I'm going to do the exact opposite of this one. So this first sheet, I'm going to delete that because we're keeping it on this one. And then I'm going to skip one, delete the third one, and then keep the last. And then down here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to skip the first one, delete the second, keep the third, and delete the fourth. So pretty much we're just going every other one on both of these designs, but make sure you have opposite selected on both designs. And the reason we do that is because we have to trim all these vectors in between. And if you didn't make a copy first, you would have missing items that you needed to keep. So that's why we make 2 copies, and then afterwards we'll have a complete set by getting rid of every other page on each one of these. And that may be a little bit confusing, but I will show you how that works here. There's a few ways you can trim the vectors. If you have a very complicated design, you could select your vectors that are inside this page here, hold Shift, select the page, then go to the trim tool, and you can clear outside boundary and click clear. The problem with this method is it takes away the vectors from these other pages that you need to keep, and it also closes the vectors. And I don't really want to close those vectors, I want to keep them open. So I'm going to close this and do Edit Undo. The way I prefer to do this that works out better is using the scissor tool. And you want to make sure this checkbox is left unchecked because we want to keep these open vectors. If we check this box, it would want to close the vectors, but we don't want to do that. So keep this box unchecked. And we're going to zoom in here, and we want to trim away anything that's not inside of a page. So for this one down here, we're going to trim these here. We're going to trim these here. And if you're using a newer version of Vectric, you can click and drag your mouse to trim away multiple objects at once. And if you have objects like this that do not overlap a page, you have to manually delete those afterwards. You cannot trim those with the scissors. So we're going to do that last. So you're just going to go into anywhere there's not a sheet, and you want to trim any vectors that are overlapping the pages. We're going to trim all these here. And this side over here is done. Now this side, we're going to do the same thing, but you can see this one is the opposite of the other one. So we're just going through all these and trimming anything overlapping. And we look good there now. Now, once you get all of your items trimmed, you want to click close. And then anything that didn't get trimmed that wasn't overlapping, you can select and just delete all those. You don't need any of those objects. There we go. And now you can see we have a complete set now that we did every other one. So now we're going to bring back our page numbers. So we'll go to our layers, bring back the visibility of our page numbers. And you can see some of them are being unused, so we can delete those because we no longer need those. So I'm just selecting all of these and hitting the delete key on my keyboard. Okay, now we have all the pages that we need. Now our next step here is we have to get these pages on the corresponding sheets up here. And if you zoom in on these, you can see this first one is A1, second one is A2, A3. So each row is a letter with a corresponding number. So A1 through A10. The next row is B1 through B10, and so on. Goes C, D, E, F, G. So we have all the way up top here, and we have a total of 10 rows and 10 columns. And that corresponds to the exact layout we have over here. And if you were to zoom in over here, you could see these correspond to the same exact layout. So when we get our items on these sheets over here, it should look similar to what we see right here. So to get these pages that we just cut onto these sheets over here, we have to put these one at a time centered onto our default sheet first. So if we zoom in to these sheets and we want to select one page at a time. So if you move your cursor in the bottom left-hand corner and click and drag up and to the right, and capturing the entire sheet inside of that selection box and release your mouse, you're going to select everything inside of that box. And then a quick way to center that onto your job is by clicking the F9 key on your keyboard. So if you just click that on your keyboard and we look up at our default sheet, you can see that centered nicely into our default sheet. And if you don't want to use the F9 key, you can also go into your transform objects, this last tool here, and then you want to go to align to material center right here. And that is another way to do that. So I'm going to close this back down. After you put a single sheet onto the default sheet, we now have to move it to the corresponding sheet with the page number here. So you can see this one is B1. So we're going to come up here and look and see that B1 is sheet number 11. So if we take this design here with it all selected still, you want to right click on it, go to move to sheet, and you can see we have a list of all 100 sheets right here. So we know we want to go to 11, so we're going to go to sheet 11, click that, and you can see that now moved that design on sheet number 11. And you can confirm that by double clicking on that sheet, and you could see the design in here. And then you can also see this grid pattern that I made to help align the sheets together. And if you wanted to hide any of that to take a look at stuff, you can go to the layers and turn the visibility off for the 1/2 inch grid, and then also the visibility for the diagonal grid. And you can see our design there for sheet B1, and you can see we're on sheet number 11. So let's bring back the visibility of our grids. And we're going to go back to our default sheet, which is this one over here. Whenever you're using a sheet other than the default is going to move over here to the right. And you can also see if we have a different sheet selected other than the default sheet, when we zoom out, you can see we can no longer select these items over here. That's because these items are on the default sheet. So we have to go back to that. You can see our sheet number 11 is now moved down to here, and that's the active sheet. So we want the default sheet to be active, so we're going to double click on that, and that's going to make that default active again and move the sheet 11 back up here. So that's all we have to do for all those pieces. We're going to move them all onto the corresponding sheets. So we're going to come down here, we'll do these one by one, and it doesn't matter which order you do these in, just as long as you put them on the right sheet. So we're going to go from left to right, selecting everything inside the box, and then hit F9 on our keyboard. That'll center that into our job. And then we're going to see it says A2. So we're going to look up here. A2 is sheet number 2. So we're going to right click, move to sheet, and we're going to move it to sheet number 2. And now that's on sheet 2. Let's go to the next one. We're going to select all of this, going left to right, hit F9, come over to our job. This one is B3. So that one would be sheet number 13. So we're going to right click, move to sheet, and 13. And then we're going to come down here. We're going to do this one, A3. We're going to select F9 to center. A3 is sheet number 3. And if you accidentally put this on the wrong sheet, let's say if you overlap 2 of them, let's say if we right click and move to sheet number 2 on accident, and it just put 2 designs on the same one, you don't want that to happen. So as long as you catch it when you do it, you want to go to undo, and that'll move it back to your default. And then you can right click, move to sheet, and then we'll go to the correct one, number 3. So try not to put them on the wrong sheet. Otherwise you'll have an overlapping vectors, and you don't want that. So we have one last sheet here. We'll select all this one and go to F9 to center. And this one is the final one, which is B4, which would be sheet number 14. So right click, move to sheet, and we'll go to sheet 14. And you can faintly see the design there. If we turn our layers off for the grid patterns, let's turn 1/2" grid and the diagonal grid off. You can see now the whole entire design is right here, and you can see it's exact same layout as it is over here. So these should correspond exactly the same, except over here they'll be all cut up. So now we're ready to print this. So let's turn our grid patterns back on. And to print this, instead of using the file print option, there's actually another way to do this by going down to export. So if we go to export and go to export as a PDF file, click on that. That's going to open up this PDF exporter. And in this, you can select which sheets you want to print and also which layers you want to print. So the settings you want to use is export all for the vectors. For the sheets, you only want to select the sheets that you want to print. So in this case, we move this over here. You could see we want to print sheet number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then also 11, 12, 13, 14. And that's what I have selected here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we come down here, we have 11, 12, 13, 14. And you just select the box here to check that to be able to print those. So you only want to select the ones you want to print. Do not select the default sheet. Otherwise that's going to want to print everything that's off to the right side there, and you don't want all that printed. So you only want to select the sheets that you have items on. So we're going to move this back over here. And if these all happen to be checkmarked, all 100, and you only wanted to print a few, you can click this clear all button and it will uncheck all of them. And then you can only check the ones you want to print. And then you can also select all of them if you happen to have something on every sheet. Just make sure you deselect the default sheet. So the next thing we have to decide is which layers we want to print. Now, always make sure you have layer 1 selected. That's going to be the actual items of your design. The following layers are all completely optional if you wanted to print those or not. I recommend printing the grid patterns because it makes it easier to align the sheets together, but those are completely optional. And you can also decide if you only want the diagonal or the 1/2" grid. So whichever ones are checkmarked here are going to be the ones that print. So you can either do both or one or neither. And then if you're using the 1/2" grid, you do not need the print margin selected because that aligns with the 1/2" grid pattern. So you're not going to see that anyways. So you can just leave that unchecked. But if you did have that checked, that doesn't really matter. But if you decide not to print the grid pattern, if you have that unchecked, I would recommend checking the print margin because you're going to have to trim the sheets when you go to overlap them. And I'll show you that when we print these, how that works. So I would do either or or you could do both, it doesn't matter, it's up to you. But having at least one of those checked is going to help trim your sheets when you go to overlap them. And then the last option we have here is the page numbers. And that is these red page numbers that are at the bottom left-hand corners. And that's just going to make it easier for you to put those in the correct locations. But like I said, these are optional if you wanted to print those or not. And also another thing, if you're using a color printer and you wanted to change the color of any of these layers, you can change the colors up in your layer menu. So I have the page number set to red, the diagonal grid set to green, the half-inch grid set to gray, and then the layer 1 set to black. So you can always change those colors if you want to. But if you're using a black and white printer, then it's only going to print in black and white. And then the last option down here is export job bounds. Just leave that unchecked. You don't need to do that. So after you have this all set up, you want to click export. And that's going to open up our file menu and ask us what we want to name our file to save it as. And that's going to save as a PDF document. So we're going to rename this. Let's name this Learn Your CNC Full Scale. And that's going to be our document name. And that's going to combine all those sheets into one PDF document. So we're going to click save. And that just saved that onto our computer. And if you wanted to save this actual file here where we have all these split up in the Vcarve format, then you want to come up here and save your file. Because we use this as a template file, this is set to be a new file. So if you want to keep this, you want to click save, and that'll save this as a new file. If you don't need this anymore, then you can also just close it out and not save it. That's completely up to you. But if you ever had to make any changes to this, then you can also save it just so you have this as a backup onto your computer. So we're going to go into our file menu, and you can see the PDF document that we just saved. So we're going to double click on that to open it up. And here we are in our PDF viewer. And we're going to make this full screen here so we can see all this. And you can see we have 1 out of 8 pages. So you can see we have A1. If we go to the next one, we have A2, A3, A4, B1, B2, B3, and B4. And each one of these has a part of the design on there. And you can see these may be a little bit faint and hard to see, but you'll see when you print these, they are much easier to see. Just because these are a thin line, they're a little bit hard to see on the actual computer here, but when you print them, they're much easier to see. So if you're happy with your layout, you want to go to print, and this will probably be different depending on which PDF viewer you're using. I'm using Adobe Acrobat Pro, but depending on which software you're using, this may look a little bit different. But no matter what you're using, you want to make sure your page sizing is set to actual size. You don't want to select fit or shrink oversized pages or a custom scale. You want to print an actual size because this is already full scale. And you also want to make sure your page size is set to a letter size, which is 8.5 by 11 inches. And then finally, you want to make sure your orientation is set to portrait. You can see if you had it in landscape, it's not going to be aligned correctly. You want to make sure you're in portrait and you're in actual size, and the paper size is set to letter. So once we have all those settings set, make sure you're printing all the pages, and we're going to click print. And then I'm going to get that from my printer, and I'm going to show you how to put this all together. After printing these all out, you can see if you use your map that we printed out first, you can see you can use these to align all your sheets up corresponding to the correct order. And now if you see these here, we have that margin around all the sheets. So one of the sheets you have to trim, and then you're going to place it over top of the other and tape them together, aligning your grid patterns. So to do that, we need our trusty scissors and some clear tape. So I'm going to trim all these and tape them together. So like I said, you just want to take one of these and just trim to that 1/2 inch line right there on the first one. And then just go all the way up and trim that right off. And just like that, and do that for every other sheet overlapping. And then when you tape these together, you can see it'll look just like that. So I'm going to trim all these up and I'll get back to you after I get these trimmed. So there we go, we have them all trimmed. I only trimmed the right side of each sheet, excluding the end sheet because we don't need to trim that one. And then I trimmed the top of the first row. And now we're going to overlap everything, aligning all the grid patterns together, and then we're going to tape it as we go along. And there we go, now we have it all taped together. Let's give it a quick measure to see if it measures the size we want it. And yep, 26 5/8 by 10 3/4. And that's the exact size we designed it inside of Vcarve. And I highly recommend printing the diagonal grids because those made it very easy to align all the sheets together. And now you see this entire template is all together in one big sheet. And now you can use this for any kind of layout purposes or anything you may need to use a full scale image of your design.